Hello, I'm Paul Hutton, editor of Smart Highways magazine. We're just getting ready to show you another session from JCT Traffic Signals Symposium 2018. But before, let me just remind you of a few things. First of all, if you're at JCT this year or are affiliated to the organisation, you can sign up for a free copy of Smart Highways magazine. Just go to the link at the bottom of the screen. Also, mark your cards for the ITS UK Summit, 26th and 27th of November at the Bristol Harbour Hotel. It will be a fantastic day talking about implementation. And next year, don't forget, Trafex, 2nd to 4th of April. It is the biggest and best Trafex yet. Don't miss it.
Nick Warwick is the manager of traffic signals for Cumbria, place that I know quite well. I've got a family place on the lakes of Lake Coniston, so I'm up there quite a lot. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about the effect of traffic signal faults and congestion on emissions. Being from the Lake District, he naturally loves walking. You can't really live there and not enjoy walking. Probably got a few rain macs, I'd imagine. He's not always worked in Cumbria. He's done some interesting projects from around the world, which he'll probably happily talk to you about during one of the breakout periods, including one major project in New Delhi. And having said that, he also does some interesting ones at home. This is an interesting one. He's currently involved in a new site with some fairly unique problems. It's the only site he's aware of that will have to cope with 400-ton sections of submarine travelling through it on a regular basis. So with that, I'll leave you to talk about traffic signal faults in Cumbria.
Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Nick Warwick. I manage the traffic signals for Cumbria, for Cumbria County Council. I'd like to tell you my take on complaints and faults. Have a look at them now. This is Cumbria. The coloured dots are the signal sites. A problem is the distances involved. Just can't nip out to have a look at a site. For example, I generally give myself about 2 hours to get from Carlisle in the north. That's where the yellow dots are, down to Barrow. That's in the bottom left. And longer if I'm heading out to some of the other sites. A few years ago, I think it's fair to say things were getting out of hand with the volume of complaints I was having to deal with. The way I looked at it then was to look at the complaint, check the site out, see what the problem was, and go from there. But with the volume of complaints, I couldn't see the wood for the trees. So I thought I'd stop and think about how I approach things and see if I could do things any differently. The pie chart shows a summary of the typical complaints that would come in. There's several hundred there in a 9-month period. About a quarter of them, that's the one shown in red, aren't to do with traffic signals. It could be anything from temporary road lights, temporary lights at roadworks, giveaway signs, zebra crossings. About a quarter of them, that's the one shown in green, are something specific to do with traffic signals. That's something like traffic signals are out, or the caller rang to say the green man isn't coming on. With these, you've got a pretty good idea of what the problem is. The remaining bits in blue, which are just under a half, are general complaints. Things like traffic signals are stuck, traffic lights only letting a few cars through. With these, all I really know is there's some kind of problem. Or it might not be, it could just be really busy. I don't know. Let's have a look in some detail at a junction. This is actually 2 junctions in Carlisle. The bits in red are detectors or inputs of one kind or another, and there's over 20 on-crossing detectors for the 2 junctions. In total, there's over 100 detectors, so quite a bit going on, really. Now, what happens if a detector goes faulty? If a detector loop on a side road becomes faulty for whatever reason, it fails in the active state. That means there's always a demand for the side road. So if you're driving up to the lights on the side road, you'll still get a green and you won't get stuck. Same thing for lots of other different types of detection. If an on-crossing detector becomes faulty at a pedestrian crossing, it extends the crossing period for pedestrians. For that side road, they might have just closed it off for a couple of days as they're working down there. Our detector loop will go faulty if it's not detected traffic for a certain time, or if it's detecting traffic continually, such as somebody parking a vehicle on it. There might be nothing physically wrong with our detectors. The fault just needs clearing with a handset, and things carry on as normal. I tried estimating the number of detectors and inputs for all the sites in Cumbria. I reckon there's about 4,000, but that's just an estimate on my part. So if a detector goes faulty, it can potentially add in delay or give extra green on, say, the side road where it's not needed. Going back to my pie chart, about a quarter of the faults were from people with specific faults. But they were things they could see were wrong, so like a lamp out or the signals were off. If that's the case, how am I going to know about a faulty MVD, say in Whitehaven? When I started looking into delays and emissions, it kind of clicked into place when I saw this graph. CO2 emissions are on the vertical axis and average vehicle speeds on the horizontal axis. Looking at the graph, emissions are at a minimum from about 20 miles an hour onwards. What happens if the average speed drops to, say, 10 miles an hour? The emissions are nearly doubled. So if you've got a faulty detector, would that contribute to increased emissions at the junction? If it's giving too much green time to the side road, then vehicles on the main road could be held up, reducing overall vehicle emissions, reducing overall vehicle speeds. As a consequence, emissions would increase. That's the theory. How am I going to test it? I decided on a small experiment over a 2-week period. I chose a busy junction in Carlisle, which runs on Scoot. Over the 2-week period, I set an on-crossing detector faulty for 4 mornings, with things working normally for the other mornings. The 2 pictures here show traffic heading southbound. The one on the left is things working normally. The one on the right is the next day with the faulty detector. The queue's about 150 meters further back compared to the previous day. I took both pictures at 8:30 in the morning. The red brick building I've arrowed in the left-hand picture, you can see it in the right-hand picture about halfway along the row of houses. Over the 2-week trial, turning counts, journey times, and queue lengths were measured. The timing points for the journey times were from a fixed point on each approach, such as a side road. The end of the journey time was when the vehicle passed the stop line at the signal-controlled junction. The graphs show the average journey time for each day between 8 and 9 in the morning. I've been consistent in how I've measured this on each of the days, whether it's with a detector faulty or in normal operation. And the point I'd like to make here is that the blue dots are the days with no faults, and the red dots are the days with the faulty on-crossing detector. The first 2 graphs were for the southbound and eastbound approaches. This is for the northbound approach. On this approach, the average journey time is around 45 seconds with no faults. It's around 55 to 80 seconds on the days with the faulty detection. I don't know if you noticed, but there's no results on the first day. I'll put that down to technical issues. Same thing for the southbound approach. No results on the last Thursday. Someone decided to park up on the main road for about half an hour, but there you go. On to the analysis of the results. I have to give my sincere thanks to Gav Jackman and his team at Aimson for their generous help and support in the modelling work. What they've done is quantify the results and put a handle on what we're looking at here. On the slide, I've put up a couple of results, CO2 and fuel consumption, but there's more detailed results in the written report. The basic modelling I've shown here gives the CO2 emissions and fuel use for the 1 hour with no faults, then rerunning the modelling with a detection fault. So comparing the 2 models, an additional 10 litres of fuel would have been used overall because of that detector fault. I've assumed we'd have the busier congested period over, say, 3 hours. And that's the combined period of say, morning, lunchtime, and evening during the day. And on that basis, we're talking about an additional 30 litres of fuel consumed in the one day if that fault is undiscovered. I've grossed that figure up to equate to a month. I've also looked at the figure for a year. I've not included weekends, which would add to the overall picture. So in the one day, with the fault undiscovered, we're talking about over half a tank of additional fuel used. Over a year, we're talking about over £9,000 worth of additional fuel consumed if the fault's undiscovered. And that's just for the one junction. In terms of CO2, we're talking about over a ton of additional CO2 generated in the 1 month, or over 14 tons of CO2 over a year. I'm not an expert on vehicle emissions, but I am more aware now of how important this kind of thing is. So these are my conclusions. The public can see certain types of fault, such as a lamp fault, and I'm entirely grateful if they let us know about it. But if there's a detector fault, that could lead to additional delays, and I want to know about it. I'd prefer to check that out for myself rather than rely on the public to let me know. So what have I done about it? I need to check on sites for faults on a regular, routine basis, and I want to connect to as many sites as possible. Several years ago, we were phasing out the old BT analog multi-point lines for our UTC system and installing broadband instead. The cost differences were incredible, particularly for sites that were further away from the UTC system. I think the costs are based on distances from the main BT exchange. It used to cost around £6,000 to connect to the 4 sets of signals that were on UTC in Whitehaven and Workington. Now with broadband, that cost is around £800 a year to do the same thing. Where we've got ducting in place, we generally use fibre to link several sites back to the one broadband line. So places like Barrow, Kendal and Workington have quite a bit of fibre installed. In other places, we've used, say, one BT broadband line and extended the network by using wireless networking. This is Penrith, 5 pedestrian crossings connected back to the one BT line. And that was put in purely to monitor those particular sites. This is Whitehaven, 6 sites connecting back with wireless to the site on the bottom right. The Whitehaven sites have some scoot in it. The site on the bottom right is a mover site. But the main point here is to use the system to keep an eye on faults. The combined cost of these 2 schemes I've shown here, which is the 2 towns of Whitehaven and Penrith, was less than £100,000. In terms of costs, what can you get for about £100,000? It's about a kilometre of single carriageway resurfacing. Here's Ambleside, it's in the Lake District. We've got 3 pedestrian crossings here with a one-way system for traffic heading north. We've introduced UTC here mainly for monitoring, but use Scoot as well for the 2 pedestrian crossings that are on the left-hand side. Scoot only comes into operation once flows go past a certain amount. The blue line shows the traffic flows before Scoot was introduced. The red line was with the 2 pedestrian crossings coordinated using Scoot. It's got a maximum cycle time of 48 seconds for this particular Scoot region. Again, the annual cost of the bill is around £400 a year. If I can keep an eye on faults and coordinate the traffic, it all seems pretty good value for money to me. The bottom line here is that I'm trying to get as much coverage of traffic signal sites as possible to pick up any detector faults. What I try and do on a routine basis is get a summary of what detector and lamp faults there are and get them fixed. We've got a Siemens UTC system. The command is something like LSTF 300, might be LSTF 400. That gives me a list of sites with a detector fault or a lamp fault. I can use the remote handset facility to connect to the sites with the detector fault and check what the problem is. Often, the detector fault can be cleared there and then. I can clear it and check if it's working okay, but see if the detector is changing state. If there's a problem with the detector, I'll include it as a list of faults to be sorted by my contractors. It helps them to know exactly what fault they're looking for. The main thing is that I know about any faults there and then, to the point of knowing which MVD, loop, or any other detector that's faulty. If, by keeping on top of the faults, I can help reduce congestion, delay, and help reduce emissions, I think that's a good thing. The last thing that I'd like to say here is that if I talked about this, say, 5 years ago, the topic of vehicle emissions would have been of interest, but what I've said today could have been seen as a bit extreme. But with the importance we now give to reducing vehicle emissions, I thought I'd better stand up and tell you my take on things. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick. An excellent example of an engineer getting out there, finding the problems and trying to get them solved. Quick question for me. Planning to do any detector fault stuff this Friday? Because I'm planning on heading up. I don't want to get stuck.
No, it's all fine.
Excellent.
It's all fine.
So I'll open it up to the rest of the room, the audience, and then see if there's any questions that anybody would like to ask. Just in the middle, at the back. Up there, Phil. Oh, just hang on a second. Just wait for the mic. Thank you.
Hello, Chris Goff, Fire East Midlands. Just wondered if you thought about adding any camera facilities into the network.
Yeah, we've got. I've got a few. It's about 9 CCTV cameras, which are very useful. But there's, it's very useful. But I think one of the things is that with quite a lot of local authorities, it's just, just perhaps 1 or 2 people to cover quite a large area. And I found that getting to grips with, actually being able to connect to the signal sites in particular has helped me an awful lot.
We've introduced quite a few IP-based cameras, which are fairly easy to bolt onto the existing UTC internet communication system. And they're very good value for money, and you can install them on existing signal poles, which adds that visual backup to what you can see from the detectors.
Yeah, I found it very useful. I think for me the thing is to be able to connect to the traffic signals controller itself and actually find out what's going on. UTC, I didn't mention in the talk about RMS. I've got RMS on certain sites where it's just an individual site, but I found that with installing UTC, you can get, and you've got a few, like in Ambleside there were 3. And I can also pick up the stage timings, or in the UTC, in the Siemens UTC system, the Astrid system, where you can look at flows, so you can actually look back on what's happening. And I found that very useful, because quite often I'll perhaps get a complaint come in, but it might be a few days later on that someone will say, well, that traffic was dreadful then, and there might be a reason for it. But one of the things, Cumbria is quite a big place, and if quite often you'll get a complaint about something, you just can't get down there.
Time for one more question, just in the row ahead.
Hi Nick, Dave Lawrence, TCT Consultancy.
Hello, Dave.
Just a quick question about the graph map with the congestion figures. Do you know if those figures, are they based on older style cars? Because obviously a lot of cars nowadays have stop-start technology, which I guess must have a bit of an impact when they're queued for longer.
I thought about that, but with that, this wasn't a sophisticated experiment. This was me setting up detector fault night before. I'd go out in the morning with a stopwatch. I had some traffic counters out there, and that was pretty much it. Thing is, I appreciate the stop-start technology, but that's when you're at a stop. But if you've just got a gradual build-up of traffic, then you've then got that during the morning peaks, you will get a traffic queue at busier sites. So that traffic queue, I could see it, but it was that bit longer and took that little bit longer to clear. So that's what I do on a routine basis now is just do a trawl of the sites on UTC and RMS and picked up whatever faults. I can clear quite a lot. I know that there's faults there that the public wouldn't see. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that the public can see certain things. I've never known anybody report an on-crossing detector faulty. I probably will now once the video comes out, but there we go.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Can I give another round of applause for Nick? Excellent presentation.
Thanks very much.